Chapter 341 The Life-Saving Vortex. A great splash of incredibly viscous mud poured from the sky, turning Zhang Xiaohou and Mo Fan into mud people instantly. It took Zhang Xiaohou quite some effort to clean himself up, and now, he was turned into a mud monkey again. Mo Fan was in a better spot, not because he was not splashed with the mud, but he was rather filthy to begin with, so an extra layer of mud did not really make any difference. Brother Fan, what should we do now? Zhang Xiaohou, who had finally met up with Mo Fan, managed to create some distance from the giant poisonous centipede. However, the distance was soon cut short when the two monsters flanked them from both directions. Zhang Xiaohou could feel his stomach flip-flopping, seeing the two gigantic monsters charging in their direction. He thought he finally had the chance to slaughter some demon beasts after becoming an intermediate magician. However, he was still extremely tiny standing in front of these commander-level demon beasts. I guess I'm left with no choice. Mo Fan stared at the muddy swamp. All he could see was waves of mud splashing toward them. Clenching his teeth, he could picture his fangs extending longer and his pupils changing color. As a matter of fact, Mo Fan did not feel like using the power of the demon element. As each time it was used, he was selling more of his soul. He could not even tell if he would still be alive after using it this time. Every time he used the power, he would have to survive 4 soul breakdowns. All his previous efforts would be in vain. The giant poisonous centipede floated on the mud and wriggled rapidly in an S shape, like a water snake. Every time it uttered a roar, a great lump of mud would pour down from the sky, followed by the disgusting gust of its breath. If it weren't for the missing limbs on the second half of its body, which hindered its balance, it would have caught up to Zhang Xiaohou easily. The centipede had huge mandibles on both sides of its mouth, looking like 2 steel blades. They clacked loudly as it was swimming across the swamp. It could not wait to tear the guy that had stepped on its tail into pieces. The centipede was shrieking endlessly. It turned out that its old enemy, the Xuanwu giant lizard, was posing a great threat to it, so it did not dare to lunge forward at its prey straight away. Likewise, the Xuanwu giant lizard did not expect to bump into the centipede, either. Its lantern-sized eyes were staring at the extremely poisonous demon beast. Its cave-sized mouth bellowed at the giant poisonous centipede in warning. The roars of the demon beasts were deafening. However, the hesitation of the two beasts somehow bought Zhang Xiaohou and Mo Fan, who was stuck in between them, some time. That being said, the two commander-level demon beasts were not brainless, either. They quickly came to an agreement between themselves. In order to showcase their savagery, they would first tear the damned humans into pieces. A vortex, Brother Fan, it's coming. In the nick of time, Zhang Xiaohou burst out screaming when the life-saving vortex finally appeared in the swamp. Mo Fan had seen it, too. He immediately stopped himself from activating the demon element. He grabbed Zhang Xiaohou and used the shadow of the mountain from the setting sun to cast Fleeing Shadow. A giant claw swept out. The Xuanwu giant lizard had launched its attack. The force of the slap alone was enough to crumble a small hill, let alone 2 magicians. Mo Fan and Zhang Xiaohou dodged the attack with the Fleeing Shadow. However, the shockwave from the slap was utterly terrifying. It managed to knock both Mo Fan and Zhang Xiaohou out from the shadow they were traveling in. Both of them were knocked flying. It felt like their bones would fall apart any second now. Luckily, they happened to be knocked toward the vortex. If they were flying in the other direction, they would surely be killed by any simple attack from either the Xuanwu giant lizard or the giant poisonous centipede. Falling from the air, Mo Fan quickly grabbed Zhang Xiaohou tight and plunged right into the vortex. The layer of rocks under the swamp had collapsed. The thick mud was sucked into the underground river with a strong current. As the bottom was blasted open, the water level of the swamp began to sink rapidly. It started from a small whirlpool with a diameter of a few meters, but it soon expanded as the opening grew. The surface of the black swamp was peaceful just a few moments ago, calm enough to reflect the night sky, but it was now filled with rumbling waves and a rain of mud pouring down a big hole. The two gigantic creatures stood in the swamp. The rolling waves seemed to have little effect on them. They continued to roar at one another in the midst of the standoff, completely ignoring the whirlpool that had appeared. The whirlpool gradually grew larger. Its diameter had reached 20 meters. From the beast's perspective, the whirlpool was not as tiny as it was before. The mud nearby poured into the hole at an insane pace, trying to fill the empty space. Mo Fan and Zhang Xiaohou had already jumped into the vortex. The flow dragged them down further, and they soon found themselves right at the center of the vortex. The two creatures pounced at the vortex when they saw the humans being dragged away by the current. Due to their enormous sizes, as they lunged in the same direction, they both mistakenly assumed that the other was trying to attack them. As such, the giant poisonous centipede responded by smashing its head into the Xuanwu giant lizard, while the latter raised its front limbs and pressed its weight down on top of the centipede's body. The Xuanwu giant lizard raised half of its body into the air before slamming it down hard. The terrifying impact ended up stirring a ring of tsunami, starting from the center of the lake. The giant lizards at the shores of the swamp were no longer in the mood to enjoy their peaceful rest. The mud tsunami had already driven them somewhere far away, leaving a great mess on the trees, the ground, and the foothills of the mountain. Under the swamp, a great force surged from the surface of the water, instantly shattering the vortex. Fortunately, Mo Fan and Zhang Xiaohou were already in the pillar of water flowing down to the underground river. If it weren't for the cushioning from the mud and water, the force would have blasted a bigger hole under the swamp. The whole swamp would have collapsed, and there was no way they would have survived. Li Man had already moved a distance away from the hole prior to the blast. Her ears were deafened by the echoes as the waterfall poured down with an unending roar. The splattering mud from the pillar of water was so strong that it could even shatter the rocks to pieces. The layer of rocks was punctured, and the whirlpool was created as planned. However, it would be a great surprise if the two men being dragged around by the current would feel at all great after their journey. Chapter 342 Giant Lizard vs. Giant Centipede. When his body slammed down on the underground riverbed, from the momentum of the plummeting mud, Mo Fan finally realized that it was too early to deem his plan perfect. The feeling of it was definitely not a pleasant one after he had just experienced the impact from the commander-level demon beast's trampling a moment ago. If it weren't for the layer of mud and water, his bones would have broken into pieces by now. Mo Fan and Zhang Xiaohou held their breath while being dragged around by the rapid current. They could feel their minds going blank, but they tried their very best to remain conscious, as they had no idea where the current would drag them in the end. Cough, 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 cough. Mo Fan dragged the half-dead Zhang Xiaohou to the shore of the river. It was impossible to tell how many layers of mud he was covered in, as it was so thick that he no longer looked human. He kept on coughing, trying to clear out the mud that had entered his nose and throat. It felt horribly disgusting. Li Man soon found the two men. When she saw Zhang Xiaohou lying beside Mo Fan unconscious, she stomped her foot on his stomach without mercy. A pillar of mud jetted out from Zhang Xiaohou's mouth as he regained consciousness. Water barrier. Li Man swiftly cast the water spell and produced tiny drops of water. They soon formed a ribbon of water and wiped off the two mudmen under Li Man's control. The watery ribbon dug into their noses and throats, giving them a thorough cleaning. Li Man ended up casting a few water barriers just to turn Mo Fan and Zhang Xiaohou back to normal. She glanced at the two half-dead young men and giggled. It's been a while since I last met teenagers who were so willing to put their lives at risk. Li Man was indeed fairly impressed by the two's courageous spirits. Normally, anyone's face would turn pale after hearing the term, commander level, and would stay as far away as possible, let alone taking the initiative to provoke them. Each of them was in charge of luring a commander-level demon beast, and the hardest thing to believe was, they actually managed to escape in one piece. Brother Fan, can you put me in charge of blasting the hole open next time? Zhang Xiaohou blurted out dully. Do you really want to next time? Asked Mo Fan in a similar tone. Zhang Xiaohou shook his head wildly. Mo Fan would never want to find trouble with a commander-level demon beast if it weren't for the fact that he desperately needed its soul remnant. The ceiling of the underground cavern shook vigorously. It felt like the fragile layer of rocks would crumble at any second. The two gigantic beasts had begun fighting one another. The endless vibration was the best indication. Should we go up? Zhang Xiaohou asked after finishing his rest. A commander-level demon beast won't die so easily. It will take days for the battle to come to an end. By the way, Li Man, didn't you mention something about an earth element soul seed? Asked Mo Fan. It's in that direction. Too bad we didn't bring any harvesting tools with us. Once I blasted it open, the energy of the soul seed will be lost fairly soon, replied Li Man in a rather pitiful voice. The Earth Element Soul Seed was definitely something remarkable, as Li Man was only able to puncture it with strong advanced magic. No wonder many hunters were keen to find it, as they would surely be able to sell it at an incredible price. Howzy, aren't you an Earth magician? What are you waiting for? Are you going to stand there until its energy is completely lost? Mo Fan kicked at Zhang Xiaohou, who was lost in his thoughts. Me? Zhang Xiaohou pointed at himself and blurted out with disbelief. Li Man and I don't have the Earth element. Who else among us can take it? Hurry the fuck up. Once you claim the Earth Element Soul Seed, it's time to go to the surface to deal with the two idiotic beasts. Exclaimed Mo Fan. Zhang Xiaohou no longer felt miserable from his previous experience. He immediately followed Li Man's directions to the location of the Earth Element Soul Seed. Waves after waves of mud were stirred up, each fiercer than the ones before. On the west side of the valley, the innocent giant lizards climbed their way up the mountain while staring at the roaring tides of mud being produced at the center of the swamp. Their instincts were urging them to stay as far away as possible. Everything within a few hundred meters of a battle between two commander-level demon beasts was at risk. The closest safe distance would be at least 1 or 2 kilometers away. The giant lizards tugged their brains and continued to climb up the mountain. They were like refugees fleeing for their lives after their homes were drowned with mud. The different segments of land close to the center of the swamp were devoured by the continuous waves of mud rolling in all directions. The two commander-level demon beasts had been enemies for quite some time in the valley, and each seeing that the other was currently suffering severe injuries, they both assumed that their time of conquering the Shijiao Valley had finally arrived. As such, they totally ignored the two humans who had somehow disappeared, and started a life-or-death brawl between themselves. The giant poisonous centipede had been living in the valley for around 70 years. It had already conquered a part of Dongjing Lake prior to the arrival of the giant lizards. However, when the giant lizards moved in around 20 years ago, its habitat was overrun with them, not to mention the Xuanwu giant lizard, who had forcibly occupied its old nest. It had no choice but to move to a smaller swamp nearby. The two creatures had been enemies for a very long time, thus they totally went all out in the battle. They were aware that the valley had a perfect balance of water and earth elements, thus either a water element soul seed or an earth element soul seed would appear every 5 or 6 years. Both the giant poisonous centipede and the Xuanwu giant lizard agreed that they could not find a better place to cultivate than here in Dongjing Lake. Only one commander was allowed in this valley. The giant poisonous centipede could no longer withhold the grudge against the Xuanwu giant lizard, which had been building up since its habitat was taken away. It was determined to avenge itself while the Xuanwu giant lizard was still recovering from severe injuries. A purple poisonous mist was discharged from the pores on the giant poisonous centipede's body. The poison rapidly contaminated the water, and even lingered in the air. The giant poisonous centipede's greatest weapon was its poison. Even commander-level demon beasts that were stronger than it would be turned into its food once they were poisoned. The Xuanwu giant lizard's stance slightly weakened when it saw the poison spreading. It was a fair bit stronger than the giant poisonous centipede. Its body was the size of a mountain, and not merely for decoration purposes. The shell on its back could easily resist the sharp mandibles of the centipede. The reason why it had yet to drive it away completely was because of its poison. The Xuanwu giant lizard was aware of its strong poison, and immediately backed off from it. To its surprise, the giant poisonous centipede pounced at it with its 100-meter-long body and tore at its face, biting a huge chunk of flesh off. The Xuanwu giant lizard was thoroughly infuriated. It stood upright and grabbed the giant poisonous centipede's limbs with its claws, tearing them apart. The front 2 limbs were amputated. A great amount of liquid jetted out from the wounds like fountains. The giant poisonous centipede uttered a furious roar. It tried to spray the liquid onto the Xuanwu giant lizard. The liquid spurting out was also poisonous. The giant poisonous centipede did not care about the 2 amputated limbs, as it still had 12 remaining. It was trying to poison the Xuanwu giant lizard with its daring move. Chapter 343 The Battle Between the Commanders. The two monsters fought fiercely, treating one another as their mortal enemy. Meanwhile, in the underground cavern, Zhang Xiaohou had refined the earth element soul seed, the flowing mud. He could feel himself soaring across the sky. It was Zhang Xiaohou's first time obtaining a soul seed. It had improved his strength significantly. Now he could even accomplish some missions that groups would have trouble doing, all on his own. This flowing mud is one of the best among the earth element's soul seeds I've seen. It's firm as a rock when it solidifies, and can turn into a vicious mud that is adhesive and poisonous as it softens, said Li Man. Zhang Xiaohou felt slightly embarrassed, as he did not expect the two would give him the soul seed just like that. The flowing mud soul seed did give Zhang Xiaohou two different feelings. As Li Man had mentioned, it had two different attributes. It was rare for a soul seed to have different attributes. Not only did it improve Zhang Xiaohou's earth element power, it also granted him different ways of utilizing his earth element. For example, most people would use earth wave to alter their location. Those who were adept with it could use it as fluctuating quicksand to hinder an enemy's movement. However, the flowing mud's earth wave would end up laying a huge swampy trap. The enemy would find their legs stuck in the mud, which not only obstructed their movement, but the water element poison would also penetrate them through the mud. Zhang Xiaohou could tell that his strength had multiplied. As he thought, following Brother Fan was definitely a wise choice. Ordinary magicians would not even have enough money to buy a soul seed after saving up for all their lives, while he had been given an extraordinary soul seed for free. Don't feel embarrassed, it's what you deserve. You put your life at stake for it. Mo Fan clapped Zhang Xiaohou's shoulders. Zhang Xiaohou had played an important role in the plan. Besides, he had sold all his possessions just to get him 2 soul essences. There was no way Mo Fan would mistreat his stupid brother, and they had conveniently found the soul seed by coincidence. Was there any reason he wouldn't be giving it to Zhang Xiaohou? Zhang Xiaohou nodded heavily. Let's head up, said Li Man. Let's go. It would be great if they were both dead. The trio quickly returned to the surface and ran toward the center of the swamp. They could hear the great collisions between the two monsters from a good distance away. Mo Fan could not help but feel impressed by their vitality. They had spent quite a long time resting underground, and yet the two creatures were still fighting one another. Suddenly, a giant limb the size of a tree slammed onto the ground in front of them. They quickly reacted and dodged aside. The centipede's limb was fairly sharp. It looked like a giant scythe being hurled in their direction, leaving Zhang Xiaohou's heart racing wildly. The giant centipede only has 6 legs remaining. Zhang Xiaohou pointed at the giant poisonous centipede and blurted out with joy. In the air above the swamp, the giant poisonous centipede was wriggling its lengthy body nimbly as it flung its limbs hard at the Xuanwu giant lizard. The Xuanwu giant lizard used the shell on its back as a shield. However, a huge crack had surfaced on the large shield, showing the outstanding power of the giant poisonous centipede's move. The Xuanwu giant lizard fell heavily into the swamp. The blow was fairly strong. It took the Xuanwu giant lizard quite some time to gather its feet. The giant poisonous centipede did not give the Xuanwu giant lizard any time to catch its breath. It wrapped its limbs around the Xuanwu giant lizard's short neck, trying to snap its neck straight away. The Xuanwu giant lizard struggled miserably. Its relatively short limbs were completely useless in a situation like this. Besides, it could no longer use its full strength due to the effects of the poison. Considering that staying in the mud would in fact restrict its own movements, the Xuanwu giant lizard dashed out from the swamp and sprinted forward. The giant centipede was still chained to the Xuanwu giant lizard's neck. Either the Xuanwu giant lizard had discovered the presence of the humans who started all this, or it was only running in a random direction, but the Xuanwu giant lizard was somehow charging straight towards where the trio was standing. The 3 quickly hid themselves. A moment later, they saw a gigantic creature with a giant centipede wrapped around its neck slamming into the walls of the valley. The trees were like a bunch of weeds in the eyes of the 2 creatures. The mountain wall was merely a wall made of tiny rocks to them. The Xuanwu giant lizard felt like it was suffocating as its neck was clutched tight. It crazily slammed into the wall, trying to knock the giant poisonous centipede off its head. The giant poisonous centipede was determined to gamble with its life. This was the final blow it would deal to the Xuanwu giant lizard. If it ended up being flung away from the Xuanwu giant lizard's head, it would surely be smashed up by the Xuanwu giant lizard's trampling claws, as it could no longer escape in time with its remaining limbs. As such, no matter how hard the Xuanwu giant lizard slammed into the walls, the giant poisonous centipede held onto its head tightly. The blood and fluid spurting from its body sprayed over the Xuanwu giant lizard's body. Just a while longer, and the poison would penetrate into its enemy. When that happened, the Xuanwu giant lizard would find its head being separated from the rest of its body. Their thunderous movement was incredibly shocking, leaving holes and ravines in the ground and on the mountain walls. Blood and pieces of flesh were scattered across the place. The two commander-level demon beasts were having their final showdown. Blood and body fluid. Any fluid inside the giant poisonous centipede was deadly poisonous. They were splashing onto the Xuanwu giant lizard's skin, penetrated through the pores, or entered its body through its wounds. The Xuanwu giant lizard was dyed purple, a sign that it was deeply contaminated by the poison. As a matter of fact, the Xuanwu giant lizard had had the upper hand throughout the battle. It had torn the giant poisonous centipede's limbs off one by one, and managed to shatter its carapace, too. However, as the battle dragged on further, the effects of the poison grew more terrifying. The Xuanwu giant lizard did not expect that it would fall to its enemy's poison in the end. It could feel its body turning numb, as its limbs were completely paralyzed. It could no longer move its body. It was feeling an incredible pain in its neck. It had failed to smash the centipede into pieces with its final slam into the wall, which in return marked its defeat. For many years, the Xuanwu giant lizard had managed to drive the giant poisonous centipede away with ease. However, in a battle where both of the creatures went all out, the latter proved to be more deadly. The giant mountain of meat slowly collapsed to the ground. The poison had spread across its entire body. Its neck was dislocated, as it had been half-snapped by the giant poisonous centipede. It was not fully snapped, as the giant poisonous centipede had lost its strength, too. It had lost another 3 limbs due to the impacts from the collisions. It only had 3 limbs remaining, while its entire body was covered in wounds. It proudly raised its head and screamed into the sky, declaring to the beasts in the valley that it had finally reclaimed its territory. Chapter 344 Commander-Level Soul Remnant. We've eaten its eggs, so its poison is useless against us. Let's kill it, Mo Fan said to the other 2 who were hiding beside him. The giant poisonous centipede's greatest weapon was its poison, which they were not afraid of even if their whole bodies were soaked in it. Now was their best chance to kill the giant poisonous centipede. Mo Fan was the first to dash forward. He desperately needed the commander-level soul remnants. He had to retrieve the Xuanwu giant lizard's soul remnant before its energy dispersed. Are you trying to get yourself killed? Li Man blurted out when she saw Mo Fan rushing out like that. Even though the giant poisonous centipede was on the verge of dying due to the severe injuries it had suffered, it could still kill a warrior-level creature instantly with a random attack. Mo Fan would surely be killed by the infuriated giant poisonous centipede if he were charging straight at it. Mo Fan could not care less about the risk. He had to collect the soul remnant as soon as possible. The Xuanwu giant lizard was indeed enormous. Mo Fan felt like he was running under the ruins of a huge building. He drew out the little loach pendant from his chest. Soon, the dead Xuanwu giant lizard began to glow like a firefly. The glow perfectly followed the outline of its body. The little loach pendant emitted a similar glow as it slowly drew the soul out from the Xuanwu giant lizard's flesh. However, to Mo Fan's surprise, the Xuanwu giant lizard's soul was large, too. He could even see it lunging at him with the unwillingness and anger of death. He felt a great chill go straight down his soul. The Xuanwu giant lizard's soul opened its mouth wide, trying to bite in Mo Fan's direction. Mo Fan was stunned. The Xuanwu giant lizard's soul looked totally alive. It even had the same suffocating pressure of a commander-level demon beast. The deafening roar left Mo Fan's ears buzzing, completely dazing him. A strong sense of danger came right at him. Mo Fan could feel himself being encapsulated within the deadly aura. His body and soul were going to be shattered into pieces. Buzz! The little loach pendant let out a bright chime, sensing that its master was in danger. A serene blue glow erupted from the pendant, turning into rays of light fired at the Xuanwu giant lizard's soul. The Xuanwu giant lizard seemed to be afraid of the rays. It took a few steps backward before floating away in panic. The little loach pendant had no intention of letting its prey go. It was its first time tasting a commander-level soul, thus it would not allow the Xuanwu giant lizard to escape. The rays of light transformed into lengths of soul chains, penetrating the giant soul of the Xuanwu giant lizard. The chains tightly bound the escaping soul. The Xuanwu giant lizard was bound up tightly before it could run away, and dragged back into the inner world of the pendant by the rays of light. The Xuanwu giant lizard was utterly terrified. It burst into screams of agony, but no matter how hard it struggled, it could not break free from the chains. A soul was fairly light in weight. Despite the Xuanwu giant lizard's enormous size and strength, the little loach pendant was able to drag its soul back with ease. The closer it was dragged toward the pendant, the smaller the Xuanwu giant lizard became. When it was right in front of Mo Fan, it turned into a tiny blue puff of flame. The flame was no longer as intimidating as before. As Mo Fan collected his thoughts, the Xuanwu giant lizard's soul was fully sucked into the little loach pendant, joining the others in the world inside the pendant. I thought that was the end for me. Mo Fan's face was white with fear. He never thought the Xuanwu giant lizard would still be so terrifying after it was dead. It forced Mo Fan to re-evaluate the commander-level demon beast. Not only was their flesh powerful, their souls were also domineering in the nether realm. Mo Fan let out a relieved sigh, knowing that the little loach pendant had saved his life once again. After quickly inspecting the interior of the pendant, Mo Fan discovered that the soul of the Xuanwu giant lizard was floating above the river. It was definitely outstanding among the souls drifting in the world. There existed a unique world inside the little loach pendant. The underground holy spring that it had absorbed before had turned into a long river cycling endlessly in the world. The soul essences and soul remnants that the little loach pendant had absorbed floated above the river made from the underground holy spring. The souls were embellishing the river like candlelights and lanterns. The reflections on the surface of the river showed the appearance of the demon beasts while they were still alive. From afar, it looked like the souls were stars, while the river was like the galaxy containing them. Regardless of how savage the demon beasts were while they were still alive, each of their souls had turned into an elegant glowing star in this place, merging with the calm and peaceful world. I finally acquired a commander-level soul remnant. Too bad it wasn't a soul essence. Mo Fan was relieved when he finally subdued the Xuanwu giant lizard's soul. He no longer had to suffer from the demon element. With the help of this commander-level soul remnant, he was confident that he could survive the final soul breakdown from the demon element and become human once again. Brother Fan, behind you!" Zhang Xiaohou called out with trembling teeth. Mo Fan calmly turned around and saw a bloody giant centipede half rising in the air while staring down at him. The eyes on its sunken face displayed a vicious and disdainful gaze. A mere human dared to steal its loot after it had won the glorious battle? The giant poisonous centipede was completely overwhelmed with savagery after killing the Xuanwu giant lizard, who had a higher lineage than itself. It was highly possible that the giant poisonous centipede would undergo a significant evolution after this. In this world that obeyed the law of the jungle, demon beasts that managed to kill a higher lineage demon beast would break through, as if they were blessed by nature. Currently, although the giant poisonous centipede was on the verge of dying, its aura was stronger than before. Mo Fan's body completely stiffened when the demon beast was merely staring down at him. Damn it, I was too impatient. Cursed Mo Fan. Mo Fan was too desperate to acquire the commander-level soul remnant, plus he was afraid that the energy of the soul would disperse rather quickly. As such, he had rushed toward it recklessly. To his surprise, the giant poisonous centipede was as hot-tempered as usual, despite its severe injuries. It slowly opened its giant mouth, as if it had already given Mo Fan a death sentence. Plummeting rays. As Mo Fan was clenching his teeth and about to run away with fleeing shadow, he heard Li Man's rather imperious voice. Several brilliant constellations were summoned beside her, which set her off looking like a goddess that had descended to the mundane world, sacred yet glamorous. Golden rays appeared in her vicinity, slowly turning into a rain of arrows under her control. Advanced. Zhang Xiaohou was lost in amazement. Mo Fan also opened his eyes wide and stared at the woman in disbelief. Oh my god, this big booty woman is an advanced magician,